The mist clung low over the Yangtze River, silvered by the pale glow of the moon. A weary traveler paused on the stone bridge, his breath shallow as he tried to pierce the fog. Then, out of the shifting whiteness, she appeared, a woman in flowing silks, her skin as pale as carved jade, her smile tender and terrifying all at once. He felt no fear at first, only a sudden, unbearable longing. Her gaze held him, deeper than the current below, and for a heartbeat he thought himself blessed by the gods. But when he dared glance at the water's surface, the reflection betrayed the truth. The slender body was not that of a woman, but of a serpent coiled in endless curves. The traveler's lips parted in silent awe, and the legend began. Bai Suzhen's story did not rise from a single village tale, nor from one fearful witness. It was born at the crossroads of myth, history, and human desire. In Chinese folklore, snakes have always carried a double nature, feared as tricksters and killers, yet revered as bringers of wisdom and hidden power. To encounter one in human form was to step across the threshold between worlds. According to legend, Bai Suzhen was no ordinary serpent. She was said to have cultivated for centuries, drawing strength from storms, mountains, and rivers, until she could assume the flawless body of a woman. Her transformation was not merely a disguise, but a perfection of beauty, an embodiment of allure itself. Travelers whispered of meeting her on lonely roads, where her gentle voice promised rest. Fishermen told of seeing her by moonlit banks, her robes drifting like mist, her laughter soft as falling rain. Always she appeared at moments of weakness, when the body was weary, the heart was restless, or the soul was starved of comfort. Yet beneath her grace lay the silent memory of scales and venom. Her beauty was a mask, and her mask was flawless. Those who gazed upon her found themselves torn between reverence and dread, desire and despair. She was not only a creature of legend, she was temptation made flesh.
To understand Bai Suzhen is to understand not only the power of beauty, but the deeper craft of seduction, the weaving of illusion, the quiet breaking of resolve. Unlike mortal women, bound by the fragility of flesh and fleeting youth, she was timeless. Every gesture she made was sharpened by centuries of patience. Every smile practiced until it felt as natural as breathing. Her methods were never crude. She did not lunge from shadows or strike with sudden violence. Instead, she emerged where loneliness already festered. A scholar trudging home after years of study, weary and unrecognized. A soldier scarred by battle, returning to a family that no longer knew him. A merchant crushed by debts, staring too long at the dark waters of the river. To such men, she appeared not as a threat, but as salvation. She spoke little at first, a question, gentle and harmless. "Are you tired?" Or a soft observation, "You walk alone tonight?" Her voice was low, never demanding, only inviting. The moment stretched, the silence around her becoming almost sacred, as if the world itself bent to listen. And then came the illusion. To the scholar, she might seem the perfect confidant, someone who valued his wit when the world mocked his hunger. To the soldier, she became the embodiment of peace, a tender presence after years of blood. To the merchant, she appeared as fortune itself, promising luck and prosperity if only he trusted her. Her seduction was not in words alone. It was in the way she seemed to carry the scent of rain after drought and how the night grew brighter when she smiled. For some, it was the brush of her sleeve, as light as falling snow that lingered in memory. For others, the sudden warmth of her gaze, a warmth that hid the cold truth beneath. Bai Suzhen did not chase her prey, they came willingly. Desire made them blind, and once their hearts surrendered, their bodies followed. What happened after was whispered only in fragments. Some claimed she drained their very essence, leaving them pale and hollow, though smiling in their final breath. Others swore she bound their spirits, drawing them into her endless solitude beneath the river's surface. Yet always the pattern remained. She sought not the strongest, but the weary, not the proud, but the wounded. Her victims were chosen with precision, as though she saw into the secret fractures of every soul. It was there, in those fractures, that she set her hooks, pulling men, and sometimes women, into a web spun of longing and dread. Not all who crossed Bai Suzhen's path were destined to fall, yet the ones who did shared a pattern too consistent to be dismissed as chance. Folklore paints her not as a reckless predator, but as a precise hunter. Each victim was selected not for power or wealth alone, but for the hidden shadows they carried within themselves. The scholars. The first group most often named in village stories were the scholars, men who had spent decades locked in cramped chambers, studying under candlelight until their eyes burned and their fingers stiffened. For them, the civil service examinations were everything, the single fragile bridge to a future of honor. Yet for everyone who succeeded, 1,000 were crushed by failure, left adrift in shame and despair. To such men, Bai Suzhen appeared not as danger, but as consolation. She listened with patience as they recited verses, nodding as if every word were precious. Her laughter, gentle and knowing, seemed to erase the weight of their wasted years. In her presence, they felt their intellect validated, their souls seen. When they followed her into the mist, it was not from lust alone, but from a desperate hunger to be acknowledged. Some were never seen again. Others returned with hair white as snow, muttering that they had glimpsed both paradise and hell in a single pair of eyes. The soldiers. Equally common were the soldiers, men hardened by battle, haunted by the screams of comrades who would never return. China in the Song dynasty was a land often torn by conflict, border skirmishes, rebellions, invasions from the north. Soldiers marched out with pride and returned with scars deeper than flesh. When Bai Suzhen sought them, she did not present herself as a temptress, but as peace itself. To the weary veteran, her touch was softer than any lullaby. Her gaze promised not victory nor honor, but rest. Legends say men who had survived arrows and blades fell in moments before her, their resolve crumbling like sand. Some were found later, lying by riverbanks, their faces calm as though they had finally found sleep. Others vanished in her embrace, their weapons left behind, rusting in the grass. The merchants and wanderers. Merchants too found themselves drawn into her orbit. Men crushed by debt, tricked by rivals, or abandoned by fortune. Men whose ambition had soured into desperation. Bai Suzhen's allure for them was different. She was prosperity incarnate, a vision of wealth and stability, whispering promises that their luck could turn if they surrendered to her guidance. Wanderers and travelers, meanwhile, were the most vulnerable. Far from home, burdened by loneliness, they were prime prey. To them, she was the perfect companion for one night's journey, someone who filled the silence of the road with warmth. But when dawn came, the wanderer was gone, and only his belongings remained. Boots by the roadside, a coin purse tangled in reeds, or a half-written letter clutched in cold fingers. The women. Though rarer in the tales, there are whispers that women too encountered Bai Suzhen. Some say she appeared not as rival, but as sister and confidant, offering secret knowledge of beauty and eternal youth. These women often grew obsessed, forsaking families, abandoning children, or wandering off into the mist to meet her once more. Whether they perished or were transformed, none can say with certainty. A pattern of longing. The thread uniting her victims was never strength or status, but longing. The lonely, the broken, the overlooked, they carried fractures in their hearts, and Bai Suzhen slipped into those fractures with the precision of a blade sliding between ribs. Her allure was not mere beauty, it was the promise of fulfillment, and for those already weakened by the world, that promise was irresistible. In this way, she became less a legend of a single woman serpent and more an allegory of hunger itself, the hunger for love, peace, wealth, or acknowledgement. To meet her was to confront one's deepest desire, and to yield was to vanish into it. Legends often speak of monsters that strike with claws or fangs, creatures whose terror lies in the violence of their attack. Bai Suzhen was different. Her strength was not in the suddenness of her strike, but in the slowness of her entanglement. She did not seize the body first. She conquered the mind. The whisper in the mind. The human heart is fragile, and Bai Suzhen understood this better than any mortal. She did not force her victims into obedience. She planted whispers. A man would return home from an encounter with her, telling himself that it was nothing, that he had simply seen a stranger on the road. Yet at night he would hear her voice in his dreams, soft, persuasive, lingering. The whispers were not commands, but questions. Why suffer alone? Why keep walking through shadows when light awaits? Each question slid into the mind like water through cracks in stone, wearing down resistance over time. Those who tried to pray found their prayers interrupted by sudden images. Her eyes, luminous and unblinking, her lips curving into that half-smile that seemed both tender and mocking. Breaking the bonds. In the Confucian world of the Song dynasty, a man's duty was to his family, his ancestors, his community. Yet Bai Suzhen unraveled these duties with alarming ease. She did not ask a man to betray his wife or children. She merely made him forget they existed. Wives told stories of husbands who stared blankly at the hearth, their food untouched, their eyes clouded with visions of something unseen. Fathers forgot to discipline their sons. Sons neglected their aging parents. It was as if Bai Suzhen reached into their minds and plucked out the threads that tied them to others, leaving them drifting, untethered. Even the strongest bonds could be broken. One tale tells of a man who, when confronted by his crying wife, whispered only, "She is waiting for me." Then he left the house and never returned. The illusion of choice. What made Bai Suzhen most terrifying was the illusion that her victims acted of their own will. They were not dragged screaming into the mist. They walked, smiling, as if going to meet a lover. Their neighbors would shake their heads and say, "He wanted this." Yet the truth was subtler, darker. By entering the mind, she stripped away defenses so gently that surrender felt like choice. To the victim, desire became indistinguishable from destiny. To outsiders, it looked like madness, but to Bai Suzhen, it was mastery. The slow art of bending a soul until it bent itself. the mask of compassion. Another layer of her seduction was compassion. She did not always appear as a temptress in silk. Sometimes she came as a healer, offering herbs for pain or water for thirst. She might touch a soldier's bandaged wound and murmur, "Rest, I will watch over you." For the sick, her presence felt like medicine itself. For the grieving, her words seemed like balm. But beneath this tenderness lurked the serpent. Just as snakes shed their skins, so too could Bai Suzhen shed her mask of kindness when it suited her. The moment a victim leaned too heavily on her comfort, she drew them closer, binding them in invisible chains of devotion. Desire as a trap. Desire in her hands was not a fleeting hunger, but a weapon. Scholars of later generations compared her to the fox spirits of Liajai tales, who seduced men with illusions. Yet Bai Suzhen was more than illusion. She was inevitability. The fox spirit played games. The serpent suffocated. Every victim believed they had found what they were missing: love, peace, prosperity, recognition. But each gift was poisoned. Love became obsession. Peace became surrender. Prosperity became ruin. Recognition became madness. She did not take their lives immediately. She let them feed on their own longing until it consumed them whole. The terror of the familiar. Perhaps the most unsettling part of Bai Suzhen's allure was how natural it felt. To see a demon in monstrous form is terrifying but safe. The mind resists what it cannot comprehend. To see a demon in the form of one's most intimate desire is far worse. That was Bai Suzhen's genius. She made her victims betray themselves. No blade, no curse, no chain was needed. They were undone by their own hearts, their own longings. And in that unraveling, she remained eternal, both victimizer and mirror, showing humanity the horror that comes from within. To understand why Bai Suzhen's story took root so deeply, one must first step into the world that birthed her legend, China under the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE. It was an age of brilliance, yet also of fragility, a time when beauty, knowledge, and desire flourished, even as shadows crept beneath the surface. An age of splendor. The Song dynasty was a marvel of human achievement. Cities swelled with life. Kaifeng, Hangzhou, and countless smaller towns bustled with markets filled with spices, silks, lacquerware, and porcelain. Printing presses spread literature like never before. Paintings captured the elegance of rivers and mountains. Poetry was recited in tea houses as naturally as merchants haggled over coins. To live in Song China was to live in a culture intoxicated with refinement. Scholars debated Confucian classics, while common folk hummed popular ballads. Temples glowed with incense, their bells echoing across rooftops at dusk. On the surface, this was a golden age. Yet, beneath the splendor lay unease. The empire was constantly threatened by enemies at its borders: the Khitan Liao, the Jurchen Jin, the Mongols looming beyond. Armies drained the treasury, farmers bent under heavy taxes. For every glittering lantern in the city, there was a peasant family struggling in darkness. It was in this contrast between beauty and despair, refinement and ruin, that Bai Suzhen's story found fertile ground. The moral landscape. Confucian ethics ruled the Song dynasty like an invisible hand. A man's duty was to his family, his ancestors, his emperor. Filial piety was praised above all. Women were expected to obey fathers, husbands, and sons. Order was sacred, hierarchy divine. But human longing does not obey rules. The stricter the codes of morality, the more powerful the temptations that lurked beneath the surface. Forbidden desire became not only a sin, but an irresistible fascination. Bai Suzhen was therefore more than a ghost or spirit. She was the embodiment of rebellion against Confucian rigidity. To yield to her was to betray duty, to forsake family, to step outside the boundaries of order. That made her terrifying. And yet, for the weary, she was also liberating. A society obsessed with spirits. The Song dynasty was not merely political, it was deeply spiritual. Taoist priests offered talismans, Buddhist monks preached of rebirth, and folk shamans whispered charms in marketplaces. The supernatural was not a distant concept, it was woven into daily life. Illness might be blamed on angry ancestors. Drought might be said to stem from restless river spirits. Every household kept charms above their doors. Every traveler prayed before journeys. People lived with the sense that unseen worlds brushed constantly against their own. In such a world, Bai Suzhen's presence made sense. A serpent spirit who walked among humans was neither entirely impossible nor entirely unexpected. She was both a warning and a reflection, the visible tip of an unseen realm always pressing close. The river as a threshold. Geography, too, shaped her legend. Rivers were lifelines of the Song dynasty, carrying rice, goods, and people across vast distances. But rivers were also treacherous. Floods destroyed villages, whirlpools swallowed boats, and bandits haunted ferries. The river was a place of prosperity and peril, life and death. It symbolized boundaries between villages, between provinces, between the living and the dead. To place Bai Suzhen by a riverbank was to situate her exactly on that threshold, a figure who promised life but delivered ruin, who stood between safety and loss. Why her story endured. Why did her tale survive when countless others faded into obscurity? Because Bai Suzhen embodied everything the Song dynasty both feared and desired. She represented forbidden passion in a society of rigid morality. She offered comfort in an age of constant war and hardship. She reflected the beauty and sophistication of the era while hiding the danger and decay beneath. She stood at the river's edge, a symbol of both nourishment and destruction, just as the empire itself teetered between glory and collapse. Her legend was not simply a ghost story, it was a mirror held up to an age of contradictions. To the Song people, she was not distant myth, but immediate truth, a spirit who could step from the mist at any moment. And in this tension between beauty and terror, duty and desire, her legend grew roots so deep that they survive even now.
Not every man or woman who crossed Bai Suzhen's path surrendered. Folklore preserves the stories of those who tried to resist her, scholars with iron discipline, monks fortified by prayer, soldiers hardened by war. These tales are rare, and they almost never end in triumph. Yet they reveal more about her nature than the simple stories of those who vanished willingly into her arms. The Scholar of Broken Sleep. One tale tells of a young scholar named Liang, famed in his village for his discipline.
Unlike others, he claimed he had studied without distraction for years, never touched wine, never wasted time on courtesans. He prepared endlessly for the imperial exams, and his neighbors whispered that he might bring honor to their town. One night, while traveling along the banks of the Yangtze, he met her. She stepped from the mist in pale robes, asking softly, "Are you weary?" Liang, sharp-minded, recognized the danger at once. He bowed politely, but did not approach. She smiled, fading into the night. But that was only the beginning. From that day, Liang's dreams turned against him. He saw her waiting at his desk, smiling as he tried to read. He heard her voice in the turning of each page. He resisted for weeks, refusing to acknowledge the visions. Yet the cost was sleeplessness. His eyes grew dark, his mind frayed. When the exam day arrived, Liang collapsed before he could write a single line. Witnesses said he whispered her name with his last breath. Resistance had not saved him. It had only prolonged his torment. The soldier's last stand. Another story tells of Zhang, a soldier who had survived the northern wars. Hardened by blood and loss, he had vowed to let nothing sway him again. When he met Bai Suzhen by a riverside village, he recognized her beauty, but drew his sword at once, shouting, "Demon, be gone!" She did not attack. Instead, she laughed, a sound so soft it echoed like water dripping in a cave. She asked, "Do you still carry the screams of your comrades? Do you not crave silence?" Zhang cursed her and struck, but the blade met only missed. For 3 nights she haunted him, appearing just beyond the campfire, always smiling. On the 4th night, his fellow soldiers found him dead, seated upright with his sword still in hand. His expression was peaceful, as though he had finally found the silence she promised. The Monk and the Bell. Monks too feature in the stories. One in particular, known only as Master Q, was said to carry a bronze bell wherever he traveled. He had studied exorcisms and chanted sutras daily. When Bai Suzhen appeared before him, he struck the bell and recited sacred verses, filling the air with sound. She did not vanish immediately. Instead, she paused, watching him with unreadable eyes. The bell rang louder, his chanting grew faster, and at last the mist receded. Villagers claimed he had driven her back, yet even he did not escape unscarred. Weeks later, the monk was seen wandering the temple corridors, muttering in a broken voice, "She is not gone, only waiting." He lived out his days in silence, never striking the bell again. The cost of defiance. These stories share a grim theme. Resistance did not end in triumph, but in exhaustion, obsession, or ruin. No one truly defeated her. At best, they delayed her embrace. At worst, they destroyed themselves trying. And perhaps this is why her legend terrified so deeply. A demon who kills outright is fearsome, but a demon who waits, who lingers, who whispers until even the strongest crumble, that is a terror without escape. For in the end, Bai Suzhen did not simply hunt bodies. She hunted the soul's endurance, eroding it grain by grain until nothing remained but surrender. Bai Suzhen was never remembered as a mere apparition of beauty. Her legend is thick with the scent of incense, the sound of river water, and the hiss of serpents coiled in shadow. To the common people, she was both enchantress and witch, one who commanded secrets too old for human memory, secrets that bound earth, water, and spirit together. Water as her element. Rivers were her chosen stage,
and not by accident. In Chinese cosmology, water is not only life-giving, but also destructive, a shifting boundary between worlds. It nourishes rice fields, carries trade, but also swallows homes in floods, drowns children, and hides spirits. Bai Suzhen's power seemed to ebb and flow like a river's tide. She appeared most often in mist or rain, as if drawn to the damp veil between clarity and obscurity. Many stories describe her vanishing into streams or stepping upon water as though it were solid ground. Her laughter was often compared to the sound of dripping water, her silences to the stillness of a deep pond at night. Some said she drew strength from storms, her form glowing white whenever lightning split the sky. Others believed she controlled whirlpools, luring boats toward doom. For villagers living on riverbanks, she was less a person than a spirit of the current itself, an embodiment of its mercy and cruelty. The serpent's legacy. In Chinese tradition, the serpent is a paradoxical creature. It is feared for venom, but also revered as a symbol of wisdom, longevity, and transformation. Taoist texts often link serpents with immortality. Buddhist scriptures sometimes portray them as guardians of sacred relics. Bai Suzhen carried this paradox within her. She was at once healer and destroyer. In some tales, she offered herbs and water that cured illness. In others, her kiss was described as venom that seeped slowly into the blood, freezing men from within. The shedding of a serpent skin became a metaphor for her transformations. To some, she appeared as a maiden in white, to others as a shadow with scales glistening beneath moonlight. Always she reminded her victims that what they saw was only a surface, that beneath the silken skin lay something ancient and inhuman. The knowledge of herbs. Legends also speak of her mastery of medicine. Travelers whispered that she carried knowledge older than any physician's scrolls. She knew which roots cured fever, which flowers soothed sorrow, and which leaves could silence a man forever. In villages, she was sometimes remembered not as a killer, but as a healer. Mothers claimed she saved sick children. Soldiers swore she bound their wounds with herbs no one else could maim. Yet those who accepted her aid often grew dependent. They returned again and again, seeking more of her remedies, until at last they never returned at all. Thus, her knowledge was double-edged, a gift that saved lives, but bound them to her, ensuring that gratitude would one day turn into devotion. The power of illusion. More frightening still was her mastery of illusion. Many tales describe how she shifted her form to match the longing of her victims. To the lonely, she appeared as a gentle wife. To the ambitious, as a noble patroness. To the grieving, as a lost loved one returned. Taoist priests claim she wove illusions from the breath of the mist, bending light and thought alike. Her victims saw not what was real, but what they most desired, and in that illusion, they surrendered willingly. The whisper of forbidden rituals. Among monks and shamans, whispers spread that Bai Suzhen practiced forbidden arts. Some said she consumed the essence of her lovers, drawing their life force into herself. Others believed she bound spirits to serve her, weaving ghostly armies from those who perished in rivers. A few darker tales claim she fed sacrifices to the water itself, ensuring her power flowed endlessly from the depths. Whatever the truth, one certainty remained. She was not only a woman of flesh, nor merely a serpent in disguise. She was an embodiment of the old forces, those that human beings tried to tame with temples, bells, and prayers, yet never fully could. Beauty as sorcery. Perhaps her greatest magic was not in herbs or illusions, but in beauty itself. In the Song dynasty,
where women's roles were bound tightly by Confucian rules, a woman who wielded beauty freely was already seen as dangerous. Bai Suzhen transformed that danger into divinity. Her beauty was no passive gift, it was an active spell, an enchantment as deliberate as any incantation. Her gaze could still the breath in a man's chest. Her smile could unravel years of discipline. Her touch could erase grief, only to replace it with obsession. This was her sorcery, not fire or thunder, but the manipulation of longing itself. A living talisman of fear. For villagers who lived along rivers, Bai Suzhen became a living talisman of fear. Parents warned children not to wander near the banks after dusk. Wives told their husbands not to linger on lonely roads. Monks preached of vigilance, urging men to guard their hearts as fiercely as their bodies. Yet even in their warnings, there was a trace of reverence. For every story of her cruelty, another told of her mercy. She was worshipped in whispers, cursed in prayers, and feared in silence. In this balance of dread and awe, Bai Suzhen transcended mere legend. She became a force of nature, as inseparable from the rivers of China as the mist that rose from them at dawn.
Every legend needs its adversary, and for Bai Suzhen, that figure was the monk Fahai. Their conflict is one of the most enduring in Chinese folklore, not merely a duel of flesh and power, but of faith against temptation, asceticism against desire, discipline against the endless pull of longing. To understand their struggle is to see the very heart of her myth. The monk of Golden Mountain, Fahai was said to be a monk of extraordinary discipline, residing in the Jinshan Golden Mountain Temple. His reputation was that of incorruptible virtue. While others faltered, he fasted. While others sought comfort, he endured hardship. His prayers were steady as the tolling of temple bells, his heart anchored in the teachings of the Buddha. To such a man, Bai Suzhen posed the ultimate challenge. Where common travelers or soldiers fell quickly under her spell, Fahai stood like a wall of iron. But she was no ordinary spirit, and to her, a soul like Fahai's was not just a challenge, it was a prize. Their first encounter. The first meeting is described in countless ways, but always with a sense of eerie inevitability. Some say she appeared outside his temple at dusk, her white robes glowing in the fading light, her beauty as radiant as moonlight on water. Others claim she came to him in dreams, her presence filling his mind like perfume in a sealed chamber. "Holy One," she is said to have whispered, "you have denied yourself for too long. Do you not tire of your solitude?" Fahai's response was unwavering. "Desire is illusion. I have no need of it." But even as he spoke, he felt the air change around him. The silence of the temple thickened, and her eyes, dark and deep as the Yangtze itself, seemed to search for the smallest fracture in his will. The war of words and silence. Their conflict did not begin with weapons, but with dialogue. She spoke of compassion, cloaking her allure in the language of kindness. Is it not cruel to deny the heart its needs? Even the Buddha himself knew suffering. Her voice was silk, each word wrapped in sweetness. Fahai answered with scripture, his chants rising like a shield. Yet as he prayed, he saw visions, her face appearing in the smoke of incense, her figure reflected in the polished bronze of temple bells. Each verse he recited echoed back to him in her voice, distorted but familiar, as though she had bent even his faith into her shape. The assault of illusions. When words failed, she turned to illusions. He opened his eyes from meditation to see not a serpent, but a vision of paradise. Lotus ponds shimmering in sunlight, celestial maidens dancing in the air. At the center of it all stood Bai Suzhen, her hands folded as if in prayer, her beauty magnified to divine radiance. To lesser men, such a sight would have been irresistible. But Fahai closed his eyes, striking the temple bell. The sound rippled through the air like shattering glass. When the fragments fell away, she remained, smiling, unharmed, her gaze as unshaken as his faith. "You are strong," she said softly. "That is why you will break all the harder." The struggle of storm and river. Their battle soon spilled into the world of nature. Legends tell that when Fahai resisted her in prayer, Bai Suzhen unleashed storms upon the land. Rain lashed against the temple walls, rivers swelled and lightning forked across the sky. Villagers fled in terror as the waters rose, believing the heavens themselves had turned against them. In the midst of the storm, Fahai stood unmoved, chanting sutras as the flood threatened to swallow the temple. His prayers were said to calm the waters, holding back destruction by sheer force of will. Yet every drop that struck his skin burned with her presence, as though she had woven herself into the storm. The temptation of compassion. The cruelest weapon she wielded was not lust, but pity. She appeared before him as a woman in sorrow, weeping at the temple gates. "I only wanted to love," she pleaded. "Is that such a crime?" Her tears fell like rain, and even Fahai, unyielding, ascetic, felt a tremor in his heart. For a moment he saw not a serpent demon, but a woman condemned for seeking what all humans long for. And his hands faltered in their prayer, and it was then that she reached for him, her touch as soft as rain upon the skin. But he tore his gaze away, slamming his palm against the temple bell. The sound rolled out like thunder, and the image dissolved. Yet he could not forget the sensation of her tears on his skin, as real as the rain outside. The inescapable battle. Their struggle did not end in victory for either side. Fahai, though steadfast, was marked by her presence. Villagers whispered that his chants grew harsher after their encounters, his sermons darker, filled with warnings of temptation and the frailty of human will. As for Bai Suzhen, she did not vanish. Though she was driven from the temple walls, she lingered in rivers, in storms, in dreams. Her defeat was never complete, her allure never extinguished. To some, this was the greatest terror of all, that no matter how strong faith might be, desire was always waiting just beyond the edges of prayer. Symbol of eternal conflict. Thus their battle came to symbolize more than one woman and one monk. It became the eternal war between passion and discipline, between the call of the flesh and the silence of the spirit. Fahai was remembered as the wall of faith, Bai Suzhen, the flood that never ceased pressing against it. And even now, centuries later, storytellers whisper that the battle has never truly ended. For every time a man prays against temptation and fails, for every time a heart falters despite discipline, Bai Suzhen's smile lives on, echoing through the ages.
No spirit leaves the world untouched, and Bai Suzhen least of all. The ripples of her presence spread far beyond the banks of rivers or the walls of temples. They reached into families, villages, and generations. Where she walked, she left scars, and strangely, sometimes blessings. Her legend is not one of simple destruction, but of paradox. She ruined lives, yet in rare moments, she saved them. The shattered families. The most common tales are those of families broken apart. A husband vanishes in the night, his footsteps leading to the riverbank but never returning. His wife is left to raise children alone, their bellies empty, their futures darkened. In some villages,
Entire lineages claimed to have been thinned by her. Generations of men who went missing, their houses falling into poverty. Women cursed her name at shrines, burning incense with trembling hands, begging the gods to protect their sons and husbands. But protection was rarely enough, for once a man saw her, he carried her face in his mind forever. Even if he lived, he often became hollow, silent at the hearth, absent from his own life. In this way, she destroyed not only lives but bonds, unraveling the threads of families until nothing remained but silence. The village that vanished. One legend speaks of an entire riverside village cursed by her. It is said that when a group of men mocked her existence, daring each other to call her name by the water, she appeared in fury. That night, mist rolled in thick as wool, and by dawn, the village was gone. Travelers found only the echo of voices when the wind passed over the reeds. Whether this was punishment or warning, none could say, but for generations, the story was told as proof that her wrath could fall on more than just the foolish individual. The hollow survivors. Not all her victims perished. Some returned, but not as they had been. These men and women walked back into their villages pale, their eyes distant, their voices soft and strange. They often refused food, staring instead at the river as though waiting for someone. When spoken to, they answered only in fragments, "She is calling," or "I must go back." Over time, their bodies wasted, but their faces bore the faint trace of a smile, as though death was not feared, but welcomed. The living shuddered to look upon them, for it seemed they were already half spirits, claimed, but not yet taken. The paradox of mercy. And yet, her legend is not entirely cruel. There are fragments of stories where she acted as healer rather than destroyer. A child feverish with sickness was said to have recovered after a pale woman brought a vial of water and instructed the mother to bathe him in it. A farmer, bitten by a snake, lived only because an unknown maiden appeared with herbs that drew out the venom. In these stories, Bai Suzhen is remembered with reverence, even gratitude. Some peasants went so far as to build secret altars to her, placing offerings of rice or flowers by the river. They whispered prayers not only for protection from her, but for her aid, for who could deny that she carried knowledge beyond mortal reach? Salvation and damnation entwined. Why did she sometimes save and sometimes destroy? The tales give no clear answer. Some say she rewarded devotion and punished arrogance. Others claim it depended on her mood, as changeable as the river itself. A few believe that mercy was part of her seduction, that by saving a life, she bound it to her forever, ensuring that gratitude would one day turn into surrender. Thus she became a paradoxical figure, feared as a demon, yet invoked as a goddess. Some saw her as punishment, others as blessing, but all agreed that her presence was never neutral. She was a force, as capable of healing as of harming, as ready to give as to take. The legacy of fear. Generations carried her memory as both warning and prayer. Parents told children, "Do not walk by the river after dusk, or she will take you." Lovers swore oaths at her name, promising not to betray one another, lest Bai Suzhen punish them. Fishermen whispered her story before casting nets, asking her to spare their lives for another day. Even those who cursed her could not deny her place in their world. She was both shadow and light, nightmare and dream. And so her legacy endured, not because she destroyed without reason, but because she reflected the truth of human life itself, that desire is never safe, that beauty is never free, and that every gift carries the weight of loss.
Legends rise and fall with the passing of generations. Some vanish into silence, remembered only in brittle scrolls. Others survive, reshaped with each retelling, burning brighter the more they are spoken. Bai Suzhen belongs to the latter kind, a legend that refuses to die, a spirit that still breathes in the mist of rivers, in the trembling of desire, in the uneasy silence that follows beauty too perfect to be real. More than a ghost story. At first glance, her tale may seem no different from other ghostly accounts. A serpent woman, a dangerous seductress, a cautionary figure meant to frighten the careless. But her endurance lies in her complexity. She is not simply monster nor merely lover. She is both, and more. She embodies longing itself, and longing is eternal. So long as humans crave love, peace, wealth, recognition, there will always be a place for her. Each generation reimagines her face, not because they remember the past, but because they see their own reflections in her. The mirror of fear and desire. Her tale terrifies because it feels too familiar. Bai Suzhen does not destroy by brute force, she destroys by offering what people already want. A weary man longs for comfort, she offers it. A scholar longs for recognition, she gives it. A soldier longs for peace, she promises it. And then, in giving, she takes everything away. She is the mirror held up to humanity, showing that our deepest desires can also be our undoing. What destroys us is not always the monstrous claw or the raging fire, but the quiet whisper that says, "This is what you have always wanted." The weight of morality. Her tale also endures because it challenges moral boundaries. In a Confucian society where duty to family and tradition was sacred, Bai Suzhen represented the opposite, the lure of abandoning everything for the sake of personal longing. She was both a warning and a temptation. To resist her was to be virtuous, yet to imagine her was to confess weakness. Even today, her name carries that same tension. She is a symbol of rebellion against rigid codes, an embodiment of the question, what if I surrender to what I truly want, even if it destroys me? From folklore to archetype. Over centuries, storytellers reshaped her image. In operas and novels, she sometimes appears softer, more tragic, a spirit who loved too deeply, punished for seeking what mortals take for granted. In darker tales, she is merciless, dragging souls into rivers with cold satisfaction. This duality keeps her alive. Unlike figures who remain fixed in a single role, Bai Suzhen shifts like water. She can be demon or goddess, villain or victim, depending on who tells her story. In this way, she has become not just a character of folklore, but an archetype, a vessel into which each age pours its fears and desires. The whisper that never fades. Perhaps the most chilling reason her story endures is the suggestion that she never truly left. Folklore places her by the rivers of the Yangtze, but her essence is said to linger anywhere longing grows too strong. A lonely traveler who feels a presence in the mist, a dreamer who sees a pale woman smiling in the corner of sleep, a mourner who hears laughter in the sound of water, all of them keep her alive. For Bai Suzhen is not bound by geography or time. She is not only a woman in white or a serpent in disguise. She is the idea that beauty can be fatal, that love can conceal venom, that desire itself may be the most dangerous spirit of all. The eternal lesson. In the end, her legend endures because it teaches a lesson too uncomfortable to ignore. We are not undone by demons alone. We are undone by the parts of ourselves that long for what demons offer. Bai Suzhen survives because she is not just myth, she is human truth, wrapped in silk and shadow. And so when the mist rises from the riverbanks and the moonlight silvers the water, villagers still whisper her name, not only out of fear, but out of recognition. For they know, as we all do, that the face in the fog may not be hers at all, but their own desires smiling back.